everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I am Katie Moss, Head of Marketing here at Clara. And today we have two speakers with us, Natasha Newton, who's our CEO here at Clara, and Jeff Tinker, who is Global Senior Talent Acquisition Specialist at Allianz. And we're very pleased to have them talking about distance travel today. So we'll go quickly into the agenda. We will be making this webinar on demand for everyone within 24 hours if you've signed up. So stay on the lookout for that. So today we will cover distance traveled, as I mentioned. What is that? It is kind of a new terminology for folks, so we'll dive into what it actually means. We'll talk about its place in modern hiring and how you can use it in the recruiting process. And then how to assess for distance travel, what kind of questions you ask, how do you understand candidates distance traveled as part of that process. And we'll look at some real world applications. And I believe Jeff is going to tell us a little bit about his distance traveled as well. So I'll hand over to Natasha and thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Really excited to have you all here today, and very excited to be having this conversation with you, Jeff. So thank you for making yourself available to me for this. It's gonna be great. I think that there is, there's a lot happening in the world, and there's a lot happening this week, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And so what I think is really great about having this conversation is that we can talk about the things that matter, right? And the reality is that it has not changed, that people want to be valued and appreciated, and they want to contribute, and that where they've been matters, and how we show up matters. So what I love about this is that the conversation is super timely, and we can help make an impact where we are in all of our organizations. So I'm really excited about that. All right. I wanted to just touch a little bit on the constructs that we have that we're going to be talking about today. And some of them, if you're familiar with Clara, we focus on filtering talent in, right? Like we want to find those people who are adding value to our organization. And we really think about how things like critical thinking and learning agility contribute to the skills that a person has in an organization. And one of the constructs that we have been working really hard in the last year or so to define is distance traveled. And it's out there in the zeitgeist. We want to talk about it a little bit, and how we can measure it and what it means in our organizations. And so when we think about distance traveled, it's really like the difference between where we've been, and what we've learned from where we've been, and how that helps us show up in our work. So when thinking about what distance traveled is, as a definition, and we'll get that up here for you, distance traveled is really the measure of where someone has landed based on where they started, right? Like what they've been able to achieve given their starting place in the world, and how they've walked through things. And it's reflective of the challenges that a person has had, and like what has shaped them. And I think what's interesting about it is, for me, when you look at like little kids and we see their potential, and they're so full of ideas, and they're so full of like life and energy, there's really this sort of delta between what their actual potential is and what their realized potential is. And some of that has to do with setbacks, maybe it has to do with access, other challenges that they've maybe encountered. But then there are somehow these folks who close that gap, right? Like even if they've had these challenges, they've gone through some things, they've learned from that, and they've really been able to take that and leverage it into access. And so what I think is really interesting is like, why does this matter for us? It's because you don't get Shahid Khan or Oprah Winfrey or, Steve Jobs without distance travel. Like all of those people encountered hardships that they learned from. They learned to become resilient and gritty and resourceful. And that's what we want to talk about today. Like that's the type of energy we want to have in our organizations. When we think about companies, seriously, this is kind of bananas, but like when I think about this group of people here on the screen, and I think about John Paul DeJoria. Okay, so this guy started two multi-billion-dollar companies. Like And this is a guy who is, sleeping in his car at one point in his life. Like he's overcome a lot of these things. And so these are the type of people that can add so much value to our organization. So I'm really excited to talk about this with you today. And to kind of break it down just a little bit. So when we think about what is the core of distance traveled, it's a few things. We've really looked at this and sort of broken it down based on the research. So this isn't just, me and or the team thinking about like, hey, we just want to make this stuff up. There's like real legit research behind this. And when we think about it, it's made up of 6 aspects really. And that's grit, which is, we've all heard about that, right? Like we all think of like, John Wayne or something like that when we think about grittiness. We also think about resourcefulness, how we use things available to us, or if we're able to find those things. And the self-efficacy, like our own confidence and our ability to get things done. Resilience, of course, and then proactivity and anti-fragility. And we'll talk a little bit about those things in more detail. But really thinking about how it ties back to the research, I want to touch on a couple of things so that we can really ground ourselves as we move forward into this conversation. And some of the original research on this, or early research, I should say, was really coming in 2007 from Angela Duckworth. I'm sure many of you have heard of her if you're in this world of humans, really talking about grit and perseverance and talking about overcoming obstacles and the persistence that it takes to really achieve success in a lot of areas, and like how people use that as a resource. There was also some research by Ray and Brown in the mid aughts. Is that what we're calling these, in the mid aughts? Talking about how students potential in medical school specifically, how they used that grit and hardiness to be successful in their medical career. And then most recently, there's some other few folks, but Adam Grant is one of my favorites. He's a rethinker. He's always challenging us to rethink what we know. And he recently put out a book called Hidden Potential. And it is specifically about how qualities like grit and resilience and adaptability can help someone sort of close the gap on that delta, and how teams where there are diverse backgrounds and folks who maybe don't seem on paper like exactly the right fit add a lot to their team. So that's the context. But what I really want to do is kind of talk with our special guest today, Jeff Tinker. So Jeff, I want to hand the talking stick to you. I'm super excited to have you here. And one of the things that when you and I met early on, it was, I think one of the places where we sparked was around this concept of like how people get where they are and how what we've been through, when you can learn from that, brings us to a new place. And so would you do me the honor of sharing a little bit about what this concept of distance traveled means to you as an individual?
Yeah, to me as an individual, it really brings to light what the person is not only capable of doing, but like pushing themselves to do. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of us grew up, went to school. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go on to the next school, go get our first entry level job, and then move on. And that's great. If that's how that works out, that is amazing. However, that doesn't work out for most of us that way. I had a child at 20 years old. I moved from a different type of industry to a different type of industry to a different type of industry, over to another industry to this industry. So distance travel to me shows even more pieces than the 6 pieces that you guys touched on. I like to think of it as proactivity, work ethic, resourcefulness. See a lot of leadership potential in people that are able to go through all of the things that they've gone through, learn the different things they have, and then, be able to come in and really excel in what they're doing. Also, empathy and emotional intelligence. I found a lot of people that have been through so many different things and gone a different route to get where they get a little bit more emotionally intelligent. Kind of ties back to the diversity and inclusion in a job, because right now everything is innovating so quickly, and somebody being so resourceful and having the learning agility to actually change with the times when the times are immediate. I'm in the tech field right now. So ChatGPT, which was the biggest thing over the last year, is basically out of date now because of 2 guys in a garage in China, just kind of like Apple got started with Steve Jobs and Wozniak in that garage. So things are happening so quickly. The ability to transition from one thing to another is super important. And companies are really looking for the growth potential. They're looking for people that are trying to learn. They're looking for people that are trying to adapt into different things. And the diversity inclusion piece of that to me is everybody comes from a different background. Everybody, has different learning styles, has different, just overall background, if you will, and then, coming together and working together. At this point in the United States, this is the most diverse the country has ever been. And every other country that we're working in globally, typically they've already been in that space for so long. So I'm over Singapore as well as North America. And in Singapore, it is a very big group of different people from different countries all over, just kind of coming together and bringing those different aspects, bringing those different perspectives into each and every problem, and then figuring out those problems from there with limited resources, or figuring out, hey, how do we connect the known to the unknown? How do we make this happen? And they're a lot more resilient. They've got a lot more ideas to think outside the box, and that outside the box thinking, to me, it comes from the distance travel. It comes from having to figure out how to do this. I don't have the same type of opportunities for schooling. I don't have the same opportunities for scholarships, things of that nature. What can I do in the real world to actually learn those same type of skills and then bring that to this new workplace and expand what I'm doing?
Yeah, +1 on all of those things. Completely agree. I think there's a real sense of with change. It can bring a lot of fear, right? But for folks who have been through a lot of change, they become a little more resistant to the tides, right? Like it's happening. Their feet are a little more grounded, and so I do think you're absolutely right that in organizations and in cultures where there has been a lot of change and we have seen a lot of those things happening, we have these people who do show things like resistance to move. That maybe that's not the right way to say it. I want to say like adaptability, right? Like they're not easily swayed, but they can be, but they can pivot, right? Like they can respond, and it's being responsive versus being reactive, I think, and thinking through how to handle some of these challenges. So, kind of taking some of the things that you just said, I think that one of the reasons why we see that distance traveled matters in the workplace is you mentioned the diversity of teams, right? Being able to solve problems for our clients differently, being able to think about how we can open up and maybe take market share, right? If we're thinking about this from a service perspective and a business success perspective, but also those teams that are more resilient, right? Like they're responsive versus reactive, as we were talking about. And it really, when we think about these folks, there is this, the opportunity to sort of unleash that potential, right? And as you and I were talking and preparing for today, one of the things that I think really matters is you were talking about leadership, right? And true leadership. And in your organization, you were even talking about some of the folks that you work with and how it's not just being a boss, but it's like unlocking the abilities that people have to give them green pasture, right? To give them the opportunity to really use their imaginations and really leverage the skills that they come to the table with. And so for me, I think there's a real tie between hiring for potential and seeing that in people, and then as an organization, having that mindset around unlocking it and embracing it rather than being fearful of it. So there's a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on some of the ways that you've experienced from your own leadership, but also that some of the things that you all are collectively kind of working on that have helped in your organization for you to see how your team has unlocked that potential and really been able to embrace what it is that people are bringing to the table.
Yeah, certainly. So for me, I have worked with tons of bosses over the years.
Mm,
Those are the people that delegate everything, that have expectations set for you, and you have to do this. And then when it comes time to taking credit, those people are the ones taking the credit for the good, and then you're the scapegoat for the things that are bad. So when it comes to leadership, I am completely blessed. My leader is her name is Christy Moore, and she is phenomenal. She is not a boss; she is a leader.
mm,
Very encouraging to not only let people know that we as a team have taken care of things on our own, but also letting people know, the distance that you had to learn these different items to get to the place that you are to be. I'm the subject matter expert for our ATS system, for our sourcing tool, and I lead our international internship program. So encouraging me to take on these tasks that are kind of outside of my box, but then also
mm,
giving me the power to make a mistake or two, but then bringing that mistake to me and teaching me that mistake and giving
mm,
me the opportunity to learn from it instead of just saying you're wrong. And that to me is a true leader. It enables the people on the team to feel better about themselves, to realize that mistakes are going to be made. And I think for people that have done this distance traveled per se, we've made a lot of mistakes on the road to get where we go.
yeah.
And to your point, being much more proactive instead of reactive to things, and just teaching people to be respectful of one another. My parents at a very young age taught me you don't have to respect someone to show them respect. And if you bring that into a professional type of atmosphere, you can speak to people with respect and they can respect that back. You can learn a lot of things. The first time I started working with India, I'm from North Carolina. I say yes, sir, no, sir, ma'am. And then I had a coworker come to me and say, "Why are you calling me ma'am? Did I do something to upset you?" That's
Mm,
very condescending in our culture. So learning these different cultures and having the people, on your team and in your company that are different from you teaches you a lot of things. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter what company you are, your clientele does not all look like you. And, they
mm,
don't come from the same background. They don't have the same education. They don't speak the same way. So being respectful and learning those things about folks, it really helps out, and it just makes people feel a lot more included in everything that they're doing. That you're taking the time to learn those things about them. I think the life experiences really do help people prepare, especially for leadership. For self advocacy, if you will,
mm,
is really okay. I'm going to take this opportunity that is a letdown for some people. And a lot of people, they would just leave totally deflated and not continue and not try to grow. But I'm going to take this opportunity to learn. And then if I'm
mm,
working on a project that is different from what I don't know, like I can either shut off and kind of shy away from it, or I could take that opportunity to learn more. In the cloud and cloud native technologies realm that we're in, the best way to be is cloud agnostic so that you can work on every single different product. There's a lot of learning curves along the way, but it also keeps you able to do many things outside of just your little box. And like I said, touching on the problem solver, it gives you the opportunity as an employee, or gives the people on your team the opportunity to learn different things and figure those things out. And the inclusion part means that somebody else has a different way of getting to it, and the being a collaborator part means that you're going to listen to that other person. Your way is not always the right way to do it. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cattle, if you will. That's an old saying from, but there's a lot of ways to get to the end result. And there's maybe some that are more fluid, going to get you there a lot quicker. But there's other folks in the room that have different ideas. So listen to those, and then you're going to have a greater impact. The more people that respect you for the way that you actually interact with those folks, and yeah, the way you are as a coworker, the way you are as a client, the way you are as a friend or a family member, the greater impact that you're going to have on those folks, and the mentorship potential. When we hire a lot of green folks to come in with the growth mindset in hopes that they can quickly grow on and move on to another position. So somebody that has a more resilient attitude and a more learning attitude is going to be a better mentor, in my opinion, because hey, this is how we typically get here, but like, what is your idea? How are we going to get there with the way that you're doing it? Let's work on it together. And rather than just like delegating and making somebody do something or learn it on their own, hey, let's work on this together. And then once you get to the point of being comfortable in it, then I'll let you off on your own and you're doing it on your own.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you, Jeff, I'm really hearing that there's really two sides. There's the side of the individual who's maybe been through a lot, right? And is trying to learn from their experiences and apply them in their new work environment. And that's taking ownership of things, being proactive and really like making these action verbs, right? Like making them verbs where they're doing the thing. But there's also on the other side of that, for leadership to really embrace this and to encourage it in the organization, there's the sort of flip side of all of those things where there's creating the environment and giving the opportunity, recognizing that these differences are differences and they do need to be sort of managed, right? Like we need to hold space for all of these things, but that in doing so, we can create opportunities for really allowing this to drive the business forward. And so it really is both. There's the responsibility of the individual to sort of to learn from and apply, but there's also responsibility on the part of the organization to create an environment in which someone can apply the things that they've learned and sort of fail forward or take some risks, right? And that can be really challenging in an organization. I'm sort of curious if you can talk about some of the ways that you see that happening in your organization, that your team is applying this. You've talked a lot about, you just mentioned earlier, and then we've talked a lot about the fact that you do hire young people, right? Green is the word that you've used in getting them, maybe they're new to the industry. How are you seeing that you and your team are creating space for them to be able to explore, right? And try to apply some of these things that they've maybe learned or bringing in with them.
Yeah. So when we say green and young, to me, that's two different things, right? Because you can be green in an industry and not be young whatsoever. Because of the things that have happened in your life, you may have had a child during a certain time frame. You may have had an accident. You may have been in an industry that the ceiling was just so low that you were like, okay, it's time to figure out something else or move on. Or you were a veteran and got out of the military and decided that data and everything and tech is the way to go. For me, speaking with the individual and finding out, what their goals are. A big thing with Allian is we like to have somebody that wants to have a career path kind of a idea in their head. So when they come in, let's say we start them at a cloud support engineer position. For a lack of a better term, that's somewhat of a help desk for us. It deals with a lot of our clients and they call in with issues. And if they can't fix the issue, they create the ticket, escalate it, so on and so forth. Like I said, we're an agnostic company when it comes to cloud and product. So we're able to work with Azure, AWS, GCP, which we're premier partners and gold partners with all of those. But the fact that they get to work with all of those different products and learn is great. But what is going to keep them wanting to learn and going? Well, we have a really good growth opportunity when it comes to different certifications and everything that the company will reimburse the testing cost for and give them a bonus. Ideology is when somebody comes in, they're starting at one place. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be 2 years from now? Where do you want to be 3 years from now? Not the typical 5 years, because the industry changes so fast. 1 to 2 years. Where do you want to be? How can we help you get there? And our managers are tasked with sitting down, figuring out, and trying to help them kind of a career path, kind of an ideology. So, distance travel to me, when it comes to not just the industry, but when it comes to individuals, I've got a couple of examples along the way of folks that have gone from something completely different to something amazing. One in particular was a younger gentleman. He was in school and he was looking for his first job. He really wanted to just get his foot in the door and get started from there. And when I got him in, everybody interviewed him. Oh, he's really green. He's got a couple certificates, but he doesn't have the practical use of it. How are we going to get there? And I'm like, just, have the conversations. You make the decision whether or not we move forward or not. Guy comes in within a year and 2 months, has 10 certifications out of all the certifications that he can be reimbursed for. He moves on from a cloud support engineer up to a cloud operations engineer, all within less than 16 months. I have another colleague that I actually grew up with. I've known the guy for I'm 46. No young buck myself. He started out, grew up in a family business that was in automotive, and then decided at some point wanted to spend more time with the family, saw a direction in tech, was really interested in cybersecurity, took a really good coding course at North Carolina State, and then got out of that, and I got him started as a cloud migration engineer. Within 2 years' times, he had all 13 of the AWS certificates and got his gold jacket from AWS. So two completely different paths, right? Somebody young, just coming out of school, the only schooling, like he was not in a 4-year college, was not in a master's program. He'd gone to some community college. He's used Udemy, Coursera, a lot of the things that are free online, and then, just kind of built himself up that way. And he just needed his foot in the door. On the other hand, we have somebody that has lived a life, that has 3 kids, that is married, all kinds of things going on, has a full-time business, and then wants to completely transition to what he sees as his career that he'll finish out working. Seeing the potential in those folks that come from completely different backgrounds, that have that growth mindset, regardless of what they were doing prior to, and just giving the opportunity to those folks. So for me, working with the hiring manager or working with any of our stakeholders is speaking through those things. What is it you're looking for? Okay, so we're asking for 7 years experience, but like at this position, is that really what we need? Do we not need to see somebody that is going to work on all these different products and learn these products and then move on to another position in the company? Or are we just looking for somebody that's going to be here for a brief period of time? They're going to do their job, they're going to take their money, and then they're going to go somewhere else to a greener pasture. And we don't want that. We want to create an atmosphere where people want to stay with the company, that people want to grow with the company, and they see the different, actions of how to get there by looking at these folks, seeing what they did, and then kind of emulating those.
Yeah. So let me ask you some really practical questions, right? Like, obviously, I mean, at Clara, we believe that this is important, right? Like, we built an entire service and product around, like, we think this is important. You should be assessing for these kinds of things, and we should be looking for them early in the process. So can you give me a little bit of, and here's where I'm coming from. I'd like to know a little bit practically about how someone can start to look for some of those things without asking personal questions about someone's history, right? Without delving into, hey, have you been through tragedy, right? Because that's not the only way that someone can learn these types of things. How can you start to assess for those things? I mean, obviously, we have an assessment, we ask some questions, and that's validated. But if someone's looking for these and they're interviewing early in the process, like, what are some things that you would recommend that you ask, or how do you feel that out in a way that is equitable and fair, right, to every candidate who's walking through the door? Because we want that to be part of the process as well. So how are you looking for that when you're talking with newbies or candidates?
Well, with the internship program, I'll speak to that. So we do have a very robust internship program that started out as like one intern, and now I've got interns in India and Singapore and all over North America. So with those, we look for times that they've turned in a project and that project was not up to par. How did they deal with getting the negative feedback? Did they go in and fix that? Did they proactively figure out a way to either turn it in and get some additional points, or did they take it as a learning opportunity to figure out how to move on to a different point? So, when is the time that you've had a professional or educational type of stop point, and then you had to go back and fix those things? How did you start a project that required one type of product to be used on it? Like if you're creating some kind of a database in Excel and you need it for Power BI or Python or whatever to create a dashboard or something of that nature, and you didn't know how to do it, how did you go about learning to do so? So finding like practical but not personal ways for them to convey that message.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I would maybe add to that it's something that we should be asking everyone, right? Especially those folks, we think, oh, it should be especially for those folks who we think might need a little extra push. But the reality is, again, if we're thinking about that equity, like we really want to understand this about everybody, right? And so there are some, I think, expectations perhaps that maybe someone's had to have like this really hard or tragic life to be gritty or resourceful. And sometimes we think about candidates who come through traditional paths as maybe having potentially less distance traveled. And so we think about, oh, well, if they have not really faced, adversity, or maybe they have, they haven't had, I don't know, we have these expectations like, oh, they have a silver spoon in their mouth, those types of things. We think that maybe they can't get that far. But the reality is that could be true, right? It could be possible that they haven't learned from their experiences. But the reality is that there is potential for all of us to learn to be a little more resourceful and have a little more hustle, and be a little bit more effective in our work and proactive. But I think where we have seen distance traveled really be, when considering it, really be a benefit is in some of the situations that you're talking about, where we're looking at folks who are coming from non-traditional paths, right? That are, and we're not sort of giving enough credit for the fact that they might have these other traits and abilities because they don't show up on a resume, right? Like you don't necessarily see that somebody has worked 3 jobs while they were, and maybe they were washing dishes, they were washing cars, and they were, taking care of the neighbor's kid while they were putting themselves through high school or college, or, putting themselves, getting those extra certifications and those types of things. And so it's stuff we can miss if we don't have time to ask some of those questions. So I'm really curious if, when we start thinking about what distance traveled looks like, and we're thinking about it from those folks who do have more of a traditional background, what do you start to see when we're thinking about this on that sort of other side of the coin, for folks who maybe do on paper look like the people that we're trying to hire? How do we assess from them what their distance traveled is?
That is an excellent question. So to me, distance traveled is not something that is going to exclude the folks that have that much more traditional path, because they're already being considered for the position. So through their schooling and the traditional way of getting to where they are, typically they are still showing the drive and everything to get to that point. They have to go through the schooling. They have to go through the traditional path. There's still a lot of obstacles in their way at that point. But typically those people are the ones that are already considered for the position. The folks where this is more impactful is, when I find a lot of jobs now are a lot more specific on every single thing that they want. But if you have a traditional path of getting there, you still had to do a lot of work to get there. It's not knocking folks that did not go through the things that other people have gone through. What it's doing is bringing back candidates that we weren't going to look at based on keywords. Keywords right now in a lot of AI is the big thing, that if you don't have these things, you're out. However, just because you don't have those things doesn't mean there's a synonym that kind of means the same thing. It doesn't mean that through some type of job or position that you had, just because it wasn't with Accenture or one of the big 4 companies, just because it wasn't with them doesn't mean that you didn't touch the same pieces. But the problem for me is, as we know in talent acquisition, so many teams they're down to a skeleton of what they used to be. So our workload is higher. The number of candidates that we're looking through is much higher. So having the time to actually go through and look at these items without having the knowledge of how to look for those items, or having a tool like Clara that can, bring these items to light, that can send out those additional assessments to ask those questions. To me, it is not knocking folks that have a traditional way of doing it. It just means that, hey, right place, right time. like, awesome, congratulations, you're very blessed. Like, be thankful, and continue the conversation. It doesn't mean that somebody else is going to be chosen specifically because they have a further distance traveled. It just means that they actually still have the same skill set that you have, that may not have the same verbiage, it may not have the same noun in front of it, but it is the same type of experience. So we're bringing those folks back into the pool of actual candidates.
Yeah, I love that. So if somebody has talked to me for more than 15 minutes, they've probably heard me talk about baking soda, because and I experienced this, right? Like if I'm out of baking soda at home, I can Google it and find the 6 other things that get me the same outcome, right? And so looking at skills in that same way. So like, what are the transferable and adjacent skills that somebody has that give them that same type of experience? It's like, one of the folks that I work with he's like, well, hey, hi, and hello are all the same thing, right? But to your point, Jeff, when we're looking for keywords or doing Boolean searches and that type of thing, like those things get filtered out rather than getting filtered in. So it's finding more people who are qualified so that you can find the right ad, right? Like the right little spice for your team that you need right now versus just sort of a who checks the boxes is what I would sort of get at. So, all right. So I sort of took us down a rabbit trail, but I appreciate you letting me do that because I think it was really important. So let's talk a little bit about how there are ways, as we've mentioned, that you can develop distance traveled. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Do you mean as an individual develop
Yes.
that along the way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for me, I came from such a weird background. Like I remember my first job, like no tomorrow. I was a dishwasher at Chili's. I would wake up with other people's mashed potatoes under my fingernails because I had bills to pay. So from there, kind of gone on and done a million different things. I owned my own coffee shop and restaurant. I started an agency doing experiential marketing, where that's where large companies would pay us to introduce products or brands directly to consumers or to other brands around the country. And then 2020 hit and kind of pulled the rug out from under me. And it was time to completely change to something different. And again, circling back to my leader, first interview, my resume does not read like a resume. It's all contract work. For the last 20 years of my life, it was all contract work, 3 months at a time, here, there, everywhere. But the skill set learned from problem solving, having to deal with things every single day that were changed constantly because we would go from city to city, from event to event, all over the place. So we had to figure out things like on the fly, all times. Every single product that I worked on, I was a subject matter expert within 30 minutes of working with that product because I had to learn everything in and out. Speaking with her, and she saw my resume, to her, somebody that could learn anything that needed to be learned, that had the drive to get out and learn those things, that could figure out, this dumpster fire and put it out and move it on. It's about being proactive instead of reactive. So, I'm from the background of look at my resume. You don't want to talk to me until you talk to me. And then this is why things are this way. So, for me, people can develop those things along the way. Some people just have that drive where they need to learn how to do that. If you put something in front of me and I don't know how to do it, Google's my friend, ChatGPT is my friend. Like there's ways for me to learn it that is not the traditional way of learning it. Since I took this position, I was really good at talent acquisition, but it was a different type of talent acquisition. I had to learn everything about cloud. I knew absolutely nothing. Last year was a slow year for a lot of companies. I took the opportunity to get more than 6 times certified in being a technical recruiter, working with AWS, working with GCP and Azure, and working with a ton of hiring managers that were very open to teaching me or giving me suggestions of things that I needed to learn. It's finding out these different experiences. Like, when I was a kid, I was spoiled, but I was spoiled with experiences rather than material things. So I got to go to a lot of different states. I got involved in a lot of social aspect things. Worked with mentally handicapped children for a while. We even chaperoned group down to Disney World. It was an amazing experience. We'll talk about that later. But diverse experiences broaden your perspective, and that's just a proven fact. Like the more things that you experience and touch on, the broader you are, the more open you are to different ideas, and kind of bringing all those things in. When it comes to long-term goals, a lot of folks have very short-term goals. That distance travel to me is somebody seeing, hey, you know what? I've had this company doing automotive stuff for however many years. It's been great. I want to be there for the kids in a different way. I want to grow and I want to learn. So I'm going to take this 18-week course that's going to teach me and give me different certifications so that I can start at an entry-level position, kind of start a whole new industry and start from scratch. But the amount of information that I'm going to get from doing so is going to just, with me and my mindset, I'm going to take off like immediately as soon as I start learning those things. So I think being able to reflect on some of those past experiences and recognize some of those strengths, it also allows you a lot more zen, if you will, at a lot of times where you're like, you know what, like I started there, I'm here. How did I get here? Oh yeah, that's why. Because that's the drive, and I wanted to learn it, and I'm looking for 5 or 6 years down the road, or for the last opportunity that I'm going to have, rather than just focusing on right now. And a lot of companies, a lot of people are reactive instead of proactive. And the condos where I live, I'm on the HOA board. The management company has always been reactive instead of proactive. So it costs us way more money. Our assessments go up. We have to pay more dues. So every aspect of life can be tied back to distance traveled and the things that people learn in doing so.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it because it really is about connecting dots, right? Between past experience, a new experience. It sort of ties in our ability to be agile learners, right? And using our own critical thinking, like all of those things come together. And so when you can apply those in situations in which you've encountered and take the lessons and put them someplace else, like that ability is, I mean, it's critical, right? And as things, you mentioned earlier how quickly this landscape is changing, especially in tech, it certainly means that we have to be adaptive and responsive, and those folks who have that, right, or who can develop it, because it is something that can be learned, right? You can practice that. They're certainly the type of folks we want to have on our teams, right? Like we want to be hiring for that. So in thinking about how we're assessing those things, we're talking about evaluating the challenges people have overcome. You've talked about that a little bit earlier, like how you can ask people to talk about how they've responded to challenges or to feedback. Thinking about the resources that they have. How can I solve this? You gave us a great example of how you said, "Hey, I've got this downtime right now." Well, not downtime, but like a slow time, right? So what am I going to do with this? How am I going to grow? How am I going to be thinking about my next steps and what comes ahead, and what's coming down the pipe, and really being proactive about that. And then thinking about that, how that allows you to adapt and be resilient. So those have been great examples. I really love that. One of the things I'd love to ask you is just when we think about really kind of some of the differences, right, between folks who have different backgrounds. If we think about age and education versus, and how that is impacted by distance traveled. Can you give me any examples from your world? I know I've got a few from mine, certainly of people different categories of folks who we see distance traveled show up in them differently in the workplace.
It can be, folks that are, well, maybe a little bit younger, don't have a family, don't have, a ton of things going on outside of work at the moment, are willing to put in those extra hours. They're willing to kind of, just put in extra hours and do more work. But then you look at folks that have a little bit more going on. They may have a family. They may be caretakers for somebody in their family. And them and time management. Time management is huge for a lot of folks with the distance travel because we have to figure out how to do more in less time.
Mhm.
And I think teams that are a combination of younger folks and older folks, I think there's a lot of learning that can be done on both sides because technology is moving so quickly. Like I learn new stuff every single day. And then I hang out with my mom, who's 78 years old, and I hang out with her a lot. And I'm constantly teaching her how to do things. And there's so many things that I have no clue how to do. So, it's just, the people that have been through a lot more or people that have a lot more life experience typically have a few more things to actually chat through and can kind of give some pointers on life pointers outside of work. So to me, if you're on a good team, then your work is not just work. Like it's somewhat of a family type of atmosphere where everybody can learn from one another, be it the newest tech or be it this is the way that we used to have to do this. But imagine, recently, like where I'm at, there was a huge power outage for a significant amount of time and the internet was down. Like, how do you figure out how to get the data sets and everything off of Excel without internet? So, being able to show people different things that you've learned along the way, and then you can also learn from other folks, that are completely different. To me, different, having a very diverse group of workers, be it race, ethnicity, sex, it's all different mindsets of how they need to do things.
Mhm.
And me being a middle-aged white guy, like I typically have a few more opportunities that didn't it wasn't as hard for me to get to it. And
Right.
so working with somebody that has had to face adversity or not had the ability to do things based on how they look or anything of that nature, like to me it's taught me a lot of respect and also a lot of appreciation for the things that I've been able to do.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was really interesting from the research that we did was we actually saw um, sort of distance traveled scores really high in people who were a little bit older. Right. And oftentimes we think about those folks and we're like, they're aging out of the workforce, right? We're a little bit hesitant to hire them for whatever reason, right? Maybe we think they don't learn quite as much. But what was interesting about it is that they were able to connect more dots, right? When you've had more experiences, you can draw more connections, and it's not everything feels new, right? Like it feels like, oh, this is a version of something I've seen before. So I thought that was really interesting in the research. And then also, what I thought another thing that came up that I thought was really interesting is people who did not have formal educations did have higher distance traveled scores. Because again, it's sort of that I'm figuring out different ways to learn. And to the point you made earlier, like getting through a traditional education is a challenge in and of itself, right? There's a lot there. So not taking away from that, but it did just show a wider variety of skills to be able to get that same type of knowledge, but through different means, right? And maybe it's because you had 3 jobs while you were doing the thing, or you went to it later in life because to your point, you had a baby really young, and so you had bills you needed to pay, so college was maybe off the table or something like that. I think one of the things that's been interesting too is the way people have learn has changed. There are a lot of young people who are sort of, turning away from higher education because A, it's very expensive. B, it's becoming more challenging to get in, those types of things. But there's so much content and education available online if you want to apply yourself in that way. So it's been really interesting to see how different groups of people can develop and continue to sort of have that distance traveled growing in their lives. So it's certainly not something that's kind of a one and done, right? It's something that we can do for a really long time. So
We have
um,
to, especially there's a sweet age group, like there's the Gen Xers that everybody's so afraid of that you see all the memes and videos about. But if you think about like that age group of people, they started out with zero tech. like zero tech, and then learn from like I had an 8-track player, like then there was a record player, a CD player, MP3s, and then you moved on to a cell phone the size of now computers.
Yeah.
Carrying around a brick that weighs like 25 pounds. But like the learning all that technology along the way, it just shows that they are a lot more adaptable to figuring out things. And we have to, because I mean, quite literally technology changes like every single week. It's really hard to keep up with nowadays. It changes so quickly.
Yeah, that's so very, very true. So before we wrap up, is there something that I have not asked you that I should about distance traveled, or an idea you'd like to leave us with as we're thinking about building more dynamic teams and considering this?
I think during the conversations with potential candidates that you're trying to bring back into the pool of candidates instead of getting rid of them because they didn't have the keywords. I think a lot of the distance travel, I'm looking at my notes up here. And so, it speaks to their learning agility of being able to pick up things quickly, cognitive, their cognitive resilience, if you will, where they find new angles. What's the angle? How can we get to this? They have a much more of a growth mindset. They have a lot of change agility. They're open to new ideas rather than being closed off to the ideas. They're much more curiosity driven, a lot more experimental. Self-awareness typically is much higher, and their people agility. So for instance, my example of working with folks in completely different realms over in Singapore and India, and learning some of the things that I was saying incorrectly that to me was completely being polite. So people being self-aware and typically recognizing their blind spots a lot better than other people will. And also knowing that they've got some hidden strengths. And then the results, they're a lot more result driven. The resilience to handle challenges as they come their way, to me is much more important than some of the other pieces that the keywords would not pick up.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. This has been great. I really appreciated learning from you. I see Katie's popped back in. Thank you. I will hand things off to you, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm missing the slides on my screen now. Not sure if they're up for everyone else, but we do have some great resources for folks. We'll be sending those out with the email as well when we follow up with you all. We also have one more webinar coming up. So webinar number 3 in the series of 4 was actually rescheduled for next week, February 5th. And that will be on learning agility, thriving in changing environments. So be sure to check out LinkedIn and sign up for the event there, or you can visit our website, getclara.io/webinars, and you can find this webinar when it goes up, our previous ones, and our upcoming live session as well. We're so happy to have you here today, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.